When I become president, the days of treating Israel like a second-class citizen will end on day one. I will meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu immediately.
Making good on another campaign promise, to the dismay of many Palestinians who feel like second-class citizens living under Israeli occupation. But Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's first order of business at the White House is expected to be Iran.
It's no secret that Prime Minister Netanyahu really made great efforts to scuttle the Iran deal, even so much so that he went to the Congress.
Also on the table will be the enduring demand from a majority of Israelis for peace talks with Palestinians. U.S. President Donald Trump has touted himself as the man to make that happen.
You see, I know about deal-making. That's what I do.
One promise he's made regarding his pick for U.S. ambassador to Israel, a known hardliner, has already sparked controversy. Donald Trump recently reiterated his pledge to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and in the eyes of many Israelis, it's further proof that they have a new friend in the White House. But Trump's most trenchant critics say that it's Israel's illegal building of settlements that will ultimately defy his promise to make a deal, as has been the case so many times under previous U.S. administrations. The continued illegal expansion of settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories has been a continual sticking point in restarting peace talks.
1991, in that time the settlers in the West Bank 105,000. Today in the West Bank only 420,000 settlers living in the West Bank. So if you are now we are looking for 2020, we have 1 million settlers living in the West Bank, include Jerusalem. So what is the peace here?
For many Palestinians, settlement expansion is an issue that affects their daily lives. Mahmoud Zaki Amr and his wife Shunar own farmland that sits just across from an Israeli settler community.
Settlers around us are eager to expand and take more. This is the main hardship that we are facing. We are living here for 4 generations, father by grandfather, for more than 200 years.
These settlers cannot be trusted. Settlers are not safe. We are always afraid for the children.
But for some Israelis like Paula Stern, settlements aren't being expanded fast enough.
I have 3 children who are married, who would like to settle in this area and can't find a place to buy. The mountains around here are barren. Nobody lived here.
She lives in Mali Adumim, the 3rd largest settlement in the occupied West Bank.
There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be allowed on land that is empty to build an apartment building.
Hagi Ben-Artzi is a settler and Benjamin Netanyahu's brother-in-law. He says he hopes Trump will help spur more settlement expansion.
Our expectations from the new administration are based on the fact that the new president is surrounded by advisors who regard not only the strategic importance of the settlements to the security of Israel, but also believe that this part of the land, Judea and Samaria, Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, is really the homeland of the Jewish people.
Mahmoud Zaki Amr and his wife don't see much hope for the future.
When Trump came, we became more afraid. This is a real Zionist. He wants to make our lives harder, more than the previous ones.
A perspective widely shared among Palestinians, and one that casts into doubt the prospect that Trump will be a peacemaker. Randolph Nogel, the Newsmakers in occupied East Jerusalem.
To discuss this, I'm joined now by Alan Dershowitz in Miami. He's a defense attorney and the author of The Case for Israel. And from Cambridge in the UK, Ben White. He's a journalist and an author specialized in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Ben, let's start with you. Why does Benjamin Netanyahu seem to be so keen on Donald Trump?
Well, it's hard to be sure, of course, but the noises that we've had from Donald Trump's camp, both before his inauguration and since he became president, suggest that at the very least he will be more hands-off than Barack Obama was during his 2 terms with regards to Israel and the Palestinians. And of course there are good reasons to suppose that a Donald Trump administration will be at the best lukewarm and potentially opposed to the 2-state solution framework that the international community has seen as the dominant framework for resolving the issue. And of course, Netanyahu heads a government that is dominated by ministers who either explicitly or implicitly reject Palestinian self-determination and Palestinian statehood. And he's hoping that in a Donald Trump administration, he is going to find a US government that is unwilling and, in fact, unwilling to pressure Israel and actually quite supportive of the current status quo, which, of course, in this June will be 50 years of military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip.
Alan Dershowitz, so no more 2-state solution because there won't be any pushing from the U.S. side?
Absolutely false. I know Benjamin Netanyahu, I've noticed since 1970, he desperately wants to have a 2-state solution. He has said that publicly. He has said that privately. He will say that to President Trump. And I think that President Trump will move very aggressively toward getting the Palestinians to sit down and negotiate toward a 2-state solution. Remember that Israel offered a 2-state solution in 2000, 2001 under President Clinton and Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and Yasser Arafat turned it down and started an intifada in which 4,000 people were killed. In 2008, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert offered a 2-state solution, and the Palestinians did not respond. Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly offered a 2-state solution and said that he wants the Palestinians to come to negotiate in Ramallah or in Jerusalem, but not at the United Nations, toward a 2-state solution. So I think the 2-state solution is alive and well, and I have a hunch it may very well be achieved in the next 4 years. The reason it wasn't achieved in the last 8 years is because President Barack Obama, for whom I voted against Donald Trump in this past election, but Obama did not create the circumstances necessary for a 2-state solution. I think it's very possible that we will see movement toward the 2-state solution, particularly with Israel having closer relations with the Emirates, with Jordan, with Egypt, and with the Sunni Arab world out of fear of the Iranian nuclear reaction. So I'm much more optimistic than your other guest.
Professor Dershowitz, do you trust that this will happen with his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, being his peace envoy?
Well, I know his son-in-law. He was a student at Harvard when I was a professor there. He was the president of an organization that I was a faculty member of. He's a very bright guy, very strongly in favor of the 2-state solution, very much anxious to move toward peace. And to the extent he will have any influence, I think he will move the process in the right direction. Let's be optimistic. Let's open our minds. Remember that Israel has always accepted a 2-state solution in 1937, in 1946, in 1967, in 1990, 2000, 2001, 2008. It's only the Palestinians that have absolutely rejected it, which is why Mr. White's book called Apartheid is so wrong. I helped to represent Nelson Mandela. I was very active in the anti-apartheid movement. I know what apartheid is, and there is nothing like approximating even anything like that apartheid in Israel. There's apartheid in China. There's apartheid in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, let's pose some of this to Ben.
There's apartheid in Cuba. There's apartheid in Iran, but there's no apartheid in Israel.
Okay, so Ben, there's no apartheid in the West Bank and Gaza. And Trump wants to do the ultimate deal. Benjamin Netanyahu wants a 2-state solution. So what's your problem, Ben?
Okay, well, the record needs to be corrected in a few ways from what Alan has said so far. First of all, just recently, Netanyahu told a meeting of Likud members that he believes in a, quote, Palestinian state minus, which of course does not mean genuine statehood. Secondly, this idea that Israel offers these amazing, these generous offers to the Palestinians that the Palestinians reject. We don't have time to go through blow by blow all of this, but just to take Camp David in 2000 as one example, Shlomo Ben-Ami, former Israeli foreign minister, Israeli negotiator at those talks, subsequently admitted that if he was Palestinian, he would have rejected what Israel was offering at Camp David. So Israel's definition of concessions is giving back a little bit of what's not yours to begin with and then wanting everyone to laud that as generous. With regards to apartheid, the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, when they met a few years ago to review the practices of the Israeli government, both inside the occupied territories and inside the Green Line, their view was, and this is a view shared by many, of course, human rights observers, Palestinians and others, that Israel's practices and policies in the West Bank do in fact constitute a violation of the prohibition of policies of segregation and apartheid. And the disturbing backdrop to the meeting today of Trump and Netanyahu, apart from the explicit rejectionism of the Netanyahu government and its ministers of Palestinian self-determination, and the fact that you have a Trump administration very close to the settler movement too. The extra disturbing backdrop is that all the time, on the ground, Israel's occupation continues, an occupation that has created an apartheid system there where you have one group of people, Jewish Israeli settlers, who can vote in the Knesset. They voted more than a dozen times in Knesset elections since 1967. And around them are Palestinians who are subject to military rule, who can be detained without trial, whose land is confiscated and seized for settlements. Settlements, of course, that themselves constitute a grave violation of international law.
Okay, let's talk about settlements. Alan Dershowitz, I'm struggling to understand why you're so disappointed in President Obama, because last year, I mean, you had the signing of another military aid deal worth $38 billion over 10 years. President Obama never required Israel to do anything more than adhere to international law when it comes to settlements. So why were you so upset with him?
It's not what he did with Israel, it's what he didn't do with the Palestinians. He put no pressure on the Palestinians. And, you know, when you have the BDS movement, when you have the United Nations, when you have the International Criminal Court all falsely calling Israel apartheid, that disincentivizes the Palestinians from coming to the bargaining table. They say to themselves, look, we're going to get a state without having to negotiate. And that's why the BDS movement is so dangerous to the peace process. Ben talks about the state minus. That's exactly what Netanyahu said. A state minus means no air force. It means that there's no militarization. It means it's a state, but not a state that is capable of destroying Israel the way Hamas and Hezbollah fire rockets at Israel. And when you talk about the UN calling Israel apartheid, the UN, if there were a vote that Israel caused the world to be flat, it would win, 170 to 28 with 30 abstentions. Even the heads of the UN have now acknowledged that the UN is incredibly biased against Israel, and there's a movement in the UN to try to eliminate that bias. So you can't count on anything the United Nations says. It condemned Israel 40 times, and it condemned Syria once, Russia never, China never. So don't look at the United Nations for the truth when it comes to Israel. Okay, so the truth is that Israel has been trying to end the occupation and have a two-state solution for many, many years, and the Palestinians will not accept Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, and that is absolutely essential.
Okay, so let's pose that to Ben. Sure. Okay, so Ben, so you have President Trump just trying to address that imbalance because, like Alan Dershowitz, President Trump believes that Israel's treated as a second-class citizen, to use Trump's words. So he's just trying to address that imbalance, Ben.
Yeah, well, once again, the facts are not on Alan's or Trump's side. If we just take the issue of UN bias, for example, in 2016, the United Nations Security Council, of course the highest level of the United Nations, politically speaking, passed 11 resolutions on the situation in Sudan and South Sudan, passed 6 resolutions on the situation in Libya, 6 resolutions on the situation in Syria. And how many resolutions did the Security Council pass last year on Israel and the Palestinians? 1. And in fact, that was the first UN Security Council resolution passed on Israel and the Palestinians in almost 8 years. Now, if you look at other forums within, if you look at, excuse me, if you, don't interrupt me, please. If you look at other contexts and forum within the United Nations, such as the General Assembly and other agencies, the fact that there are resolutions condemning Israeli violations and supporting Palestinian rights is actually a sign of the fact that Israel has been able to get away with these grave violations for so long. So this so-called bias within the UN is actually more about the impunity that Israel enjoys and that some wishes it still would continue to enjoy.
I know the two of you are not going to. I know the two of you are not going to agree on this, Professor Dershowitz. If you gave me a second, because I want to put a button to this, because I know you're not going to agree on the UN vis-a-vis Israel. I just want to look locally again, one more time, internally within the United States. Professor Dershowitz, you said you didn't vote for Trump. You know that Trump, during the campaign and afterwards, has courted a really strange phenomenon happening right now in the United States. Whether you call it the far right, the alt-right, and everything in between, a lot of these people hate Jews very, very much. There's a tremendous strain of anti-Semitism going on in the United States right now. What makes you trust this man as your president, as somebody who can help Israel, when so many anti-Semites support him and he doesn't seem to have too much of a big problem with it?
Look, I care deeply about anti-Semitism, and there's virtually no anti-Semitism in the United States compared to Great Britain, that has an anti-Semite who is the head of the Labour Party, in France, who has extreme nationalists running for president, in Hungary, in Poland. Let Europe be concerned about its own anti-Semitism. In Turkey, there's extreme anti-Semitism. The United States has very little anti-Semitism. Most of it comes from the hard left, in fact, on university campuses. Students for Justice for Palestine has been an overtly anti-Semitic organization, and the anti-Semitism on the left far exceeds the anti-Semitism on the right. And so, we'll deal with the anti-Semitism. I don't like the fact that Trump has appealed to people from the alt-right, and I don't like the fact that the Democratic Party is considering appointing Keith Ellison as head of the Democratic National Committee, somebody who has played footsie with Farrakhan, who is an overt anti-Semite. So, but let's put anti-Semitism aside, and let's try to talk about how Israel can make peace with the Palestinians. Israel will once again offer a two-state solution, but you're going to get the Palestinians rejecting it because they think that they can get a state without any help from, or without any negotiations with Israel. That's the biggest barrier to peace today, the Palestinian unwillingness to recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, to normalize the situation. What I'm hoping for is Trump will bring in the Emirates and the Saudis and the Sunni allies of the United States, and will create a regional and global pressure on the Palestinians finally to come to the bargaining table. But people like Ben White are part of the problem, because Ben White may be the only person on the face of the earth who thinks that the United Nations is objective or favors Israel. That is just a false fact. And on planet White, that may be true.
I didn't say that.
But
You
it's
just
not
made up my words.
on the face of the earth. When you say that it favors Israel or is objective or neutral,
I didn't say it favors
that's
Israel.
just such rampant, who's interrupting who? That is just such rampant nonsense that if that's the credibility you bring to this program, you have zero credibility on any other issue.
Okay, unfortunately, I've got to wrap. Gentlemen, I would have loved for this to continue, but thanks so much for joining us, Alan Dershowitz and Ben White.